Okay, so welcome to Wine and Wisdom for this week, Parshat Behar-Bechukotai. So we have a double header this week again, two parshas that we read together. And as always, we start off by making a bracha on a glass of wine. If you don't have one, please go pour yourself one. This is an integral part of the experience. Baron, you're going to need a larger glass. I don't know what's going on there. All right. He pulls it closer to the camera. Now I think it's a larger glass. All right. Baruch, please join me in making a bracha as we get this class started. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Borei Peri Hagafen. And if you're drinking something else, I'll be having some water as well. Please make a shahakol if you're having whiskey, beer, or something else. Baruch Ata Adonai Melech HaOlam. Oh, actually, that bracha was unnecessary, and I learned that halacha recently. I forgot about it. You don't need to make a shehakol. The wine acts just like bread acts for the rest of the meal. The wine acts that way for the rest of the drinks. Okay, so welcome to Wine and Wisdom for this week, Parshat Behar-Bechukotai. As we mentioned, it's a double portion, and the title of today's class is "The Torah Isn't Only Your Therapist or Your Professor." Because as we know, the Torah is many things, right? The Torah can be your therapist, and the Torah can be your professor, and your history teacher, and your mom, and your dad, right? There's a lot of things the Torah can be, but it isn't only that. And today, the goal is going to be to appreciate the divinity of Torah, which is a whole different thing. Okay, we will get started with a Parsha overview. Baron, if I can ask you to read for us, please. This is an overview only of Parshat Behar. So we'll do that, and then I'll give you a little bit from Parshat Bechukotai. Go ahead, Baron. You're muted. I apologize.
Wow, that was doing pretty good there too. On the mountain of Sinai, God communicates to Moses the laws of the sabbatical year. Every seventh year, all work on the land should cease, and its produce becomes free for the taking for all, man and beast. 7 sabbatical cycles are followed by a 15th year, the Jubilee year, on which work on the land ceases. All indentured servants are set free, and all ancestral estates in the Holy Land that have been sold revert to their original owners. Behar also contains additional laws governing the sale of land and the prohibition against fraud and usury. God promises that if the people of Israel will keep his commandments, they will enjoy material prosperity and dwell securely in their homeland. But he also delivers a harsh rebuke, warning of exile, persecution, and other evils that will befall them if they abandon their covenant with him. Nevertheless, even when they are in the land of their enemies, I will not cast them away, nor will I ever abhor them, to destroy them and to break my covenant with them, for I am the Lord their God. The Parsha concludes with the rules on how to calculate the values of different types of pledges made to God, and the mitzvah of tithing, produce, and livestock.
Okay, so it does have a little bit. I'm not sure where it jumps. I guess very strange. I guess by God promises. You see that on the bottom where it says God promises that if the people of Israel will keep his commandments. I guess right there it should say Parshat Bechukotai, because right around there is where it starts Parshat Bechukotai, which starts off with the blessings and then the curses. So kind of the harsh rebuke, but beforehand preceded by blessings as to what will happen if we do the Torah mitzvahs, what will happen if we don't, and then it moves on to tithing from property, from livestock, etc. Okay, and that is the Parsha overview for this week. The topic that I'd like to discuss this week is really based on this quote from Socrates, which we'll talk about in a minute. But before we do so, I have a question for you guys. Okay, so welcome to all those who arrived during the Parsha overview. You didn't miss much. All we did was review what happens in these 2 weeks Parsha. But here's my question for you guys. All right, if you could type in the chat or unmute yourself, whatever. Tell me, why are you here tonight? Most of you are repeat customers. Most of you come every single week. Tell me, why are you here tonight? Right. So we're here to study Torah. Don't just give me a cop-out answer like, Rabbi, I'm here because you asked me to come. You shot me a text message reminder. There's a lot of offers that are made to you online all the time to buy things that you ignore. But for me, so for some reason, you're here. So what is the reason? Ali, why don't we start with you?
Wait, Zushi, I have a
Yeah,
question.
go ahead, Melina. Yeah, go ahead, Melina.
I'm going to keep myself on mute because I'm in the car, but I would like to answer. So just let me know when I can answer, and then I'll take myself off mute.
Go ahead. You start off.
Oh, well, but I don't want to take Ali's spot.
He called on me.
Okay, now I feel like I'm a high school teacher again. All right. Okay, so Ali, you go first. Go ahead. Why are you here tonight? Why are we here?
I really needed a glass of wine today.
Okay, fair enough. And you cannot get any wine other than a wine of wisdom. I agree.
No, but it's a bonus. And I haven't been here for a while, and I didn't learn at all this week, which is
One
not
second.
usually the case.
Learning it all this week. So you want to learn Torah?
Yeah.
That's
I try
a
to learn as much as I
I
can.
feel like you're here more for the Torah than for the wine. So I'm just going to take that liberty here.
Yes.
You could just open a bottle of wine right now and down it on your own. So here's my question to you. So you're here to learn Torah, okay? Alan, why? Why are you here to learn Torah? What's so special about this class? Why are we learning Torah? There's no right wrong answers here, guys.
Are you talking to me?
Yeah, Alan, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Oh, well, I'm here because I want to learn Torah, but I like the insights you give. You give some very interesting insights in how you do it.
Thank you. Flattery will get you everywhere. Yeah, Ron says the same thing. I'm here tonight because I like the way you teach Torah. Guys, I really hope that's not the case. I hope you guys are here maybe because you like the way I teach Torah, but you also actually like Torah. And the question is, why are we studying Torah specifically? So Alan mentioned insights. Ali mentioned she likes to learn on the Parsha. Melina, you had something to contribute?
Yeah, I mean, okay, let me see. Hold on. Can you hear me?
We do.
Hold on. Can you hear me?
We do.
Okay, so I think in brief, I think I'm here because I like studying Torah, but also I sort of had this moment this week where I realized, what do I want to do? What do I want to write about? And I remembered back to when I did a lot of like Jewish journalism, like journalism, or entertainment in like a Jewish context. And I think I realized like I kind of missed that and want to do more of that and get back into that. So I think I want to like make more of an effort to learn and to kind of find a way that I want to kind of reinvent myself career-wise while, in other
words, getting in tune with the Jewish part of yourself. You're mentioning specifically career-wise, but it could really be anyway. Getting more in tune with your Jewish part, with your Jewish heritage.
Yeah, I mean, well, okay. Now I'm going through the canyon, so I can't hear that well. So let me just listen. I have no idea what you said, but I'll come back.
Okay. Melina's driving, so as it is, I feel a little bit bad unmuting her because I really want her to focus on the driving, but definitely she's going through a canyon. Yeah, go ahead, Phil.
I'm taking to heart the admonition that seems to be prevalent in Chabad that if somebody asks you what you're doing, and you tell them, the reply is, better you should be learning Torah. So here I am.
Okay, so whatever you're doing, better you should be learning Torah. I guess the question is why. Guys, I'm not just asking this question randomly. This is the topic of today's class, appreciating why we study Torah. So I like that a lot of people don't really have a good answer for this because that means you guys are going to really appreciate this class. Some people are just reverting to like, oh, you're a good teacher and we study Torah. I love to study Torah. It's like that kind of thing. And there's a lot of reasons why we do. And I think you guys have a lot of reasons. But that's where I am now. Kalman, you want to share something? Why do we study Torah?
You're muted. Oh.
He's unmuted. Go ahead.
For me personally,
you're good. We hear you.
The selfish reason is that I come back to about a year ago when I was in Pasadena, and it was very much an eye-opening insight into the perspective of Hasidus on the Torah, and that is why I'm here, because I think that Rabbi Zushi has a very good way of explaining the Hasidic perspective on the Parsha, and for selfish reasons, that's why I'm here. Aside from the fact that it doesn't really answer the overreaching question of why we study Torah, not just because it's
right.
One of the mitzvahs of the Torah that we must do, but it also it defines who we are, and the Torah is our book of life, and it tells us how to live, and we have to learn it to know how to live.
Okay, so primarily you feel like the Torah is the source of life. It teaches us how to live, and the more we study it, the more we'll. Okay, got it. Ali mentioned in the chat, it brings us closer to Hashem. These are all really good answers. Here's my promise to you. Okay, over the next hour, we're gonna explore a little bit deeper why exactly it is that we as Jews study Torah. And my promise to you is, most of you here, not most, every single one of you here has been to Wine and Wisdom more than once or twice before. This is not your first rodeo. You know what's going to happen. You know what Torah is like. You know what studying Torah is like. But here's my promise to you. By the end of the class, your Torah game will be elevated. Okay? That means every single time you study Torah, you'll be studying for a few more reasons that will hopefully be deeper, and you'll appreciate more about why it's so important for a Jew to study Torah. Okay? And hopefully that will also lead to you coming back to Wine and Wisdom more often. but that'll be a side benefit. Okay, so we'll open up the conversation with a quote from Socrates. Socrates, of course, is a famous secular, non-Jewish. Hold on, there's one more thing in the chat. Oh no, that brings us closer to Hashem, which Ali mentioned earlier. Okay, Socrates says this quote, which is, true knowledge exists in knowing that you know nothing. There's a lot of discussion among scholars, post-Socrates scholars, obviously, post-Socratic scholars, that are trying to figure out exactly what he means by that, right? Obviously, he's hinting to a certain humility, that the more humble you are, the more you know. And really the way knowledge works is that the more you learn, the more you realize there's more to know, etc. Now, this is a completely secular and non-Jewish approach. The question is, does the Torah agree with this approach? In other words, the underlying assumption here is that everything we're doing is in order to gain knowledge, that the purpose of this all is in order to gain knowledge and to understand as much as we can. Now, the more you understand, the less you might realize that you understood even in the past, right? And the less you might realize that you know about how much there even is to understand. So here's the question, okay? When it comes to Torah, can we assume that there are parts of Torah that we do understand, or must everything remain esoteric and beyond our human grasp? Is everything always like, the more you reach, the less you know, the more you reach, the less you know? Is that a required part of learning Torah? Or can we have cumulative knowledge of Torah? We learn Torah, then we learn more, and now I know more, and now I know more, and now I know more of the Torah. That's the question on the table, okay? And this is what brings us to this week's Torah portion, okay? So text 1 is the opening verse of this week's Torah portion. Brett, if I can ask you to read for us, please. Are you driving, Brett?
No, I'm enjoying the sunset.
Oh, okay, good. As long as you're not driving, I don't want to... Okay, go ahead. So if you can read for us, please.
If you follow my statutes and observe my commandments and perform them, I will give you rains in their time. The land will yield its produce, and the tree of the field will give forth its fruit.
Okay, so this is the opening verse of this week's Parsha. And the word that's used here, and I'll put my mouse near it, even though I know, right here, the word Bechukotai, so some of you I know read Hebrew, Bechukotai is the name of the second Parsha of the two Parshas that we have. And this is, as we mentioned, this is how the Parsha opens up. If you do the commandments, then, or if you do Bechukotai, whatever that is, it says, if you go in the way of Bechukotai, if you follow Bechukotai, then you will get rain, and the Parsha goes on to give all sorts of blessings of exactly what's going to come to you. Now, here's the real question, all right? This word Bechukotai is a strange word, and this is where all the commentaries start to get involved. Bechukotai, technically, here is translated as statutes, which is just another strange English word that you probably never heard in any other context. The question is, what? If we follow what? Obviously, we follow the way of Hashem. But what specifically is the Parsha talking about? Okay? So let's start off with a 12th century scholar, Rabbeinu Bechaya, classic biblical commentator. Ali, if I can ask you to read for us, please, how Rabbeinu Bechaya explains what's going on here.
The verse mentions 3 categories of mitzvahs, namely rational, traditional, and beyond reason. Mishpatim are rational laws handed down to us from Hashem, whereas edot are traditional rites that bear testimony to Hashem's presence and the creation of the world. Chukim are those statutes that do not have any apparent reason.
Okay, so Judaism as a whole is split into 3 categories, or mitzvahs, let's say, specifically, right? Judaism is split into Torah and mitzvahs and other elements, right, and prayer, etc. But the mitzvahs specifically are divided into three categories: edut, chukim, and mishpatim. Okay, what are they? I'll give you a real nutshell. I think there's a slide for this. Yeah, there is, and they put it after this text, but we'll get back to this text in just a second. So here we go. There are three categories of mitzvah. The first one is eidos. Okay, eidos means testimony. So that's a mitzvah you never would have done without knowing about it. If you weren't Jewish, you would never be doing this mitzvah. But once you're Jewish and once you're told why you're doing this mitzvah, the whole thing seems to make perfect sense. Okay, case in point, as you can see in the picture, Passover. I never would have thought of Passover on my own. If I wasn't Jewish, if I didn't know the story of the Exodus, I would never do Passover. But now that we're told that there was this time, we were slaves in Egypt, the Torah tells us we were redeemed from Egypt, and this is how the story unfolded. So therefore, every year on Passover, we commemorate that, and we eat matzah in order to commemorate X, Y, and Z, maror in order to commemorate X, Y, and Z. That mitzvah now makes sense to me, right? And obviously, depending on how much meaning I choose to infuse it with, and how focused I am, and how meditated I am, then great. Then it'll be better or worse. But the fact is that it's understandable, but not kind of completely natural. All right. Same idea with Shabbat. Same thing. I never would have thought of it. The Torah tells us that God created the world in 6 days, rested on the seventh. Therefore, we rest every week on the seventh. Great, awesome. That's an amazing thing. I'm in. Let's do it. The Torah also tells us that in order to live a fulfilled life, you should spend a day once a week thinking about the fulfillment, right? We had a whole class on this in the past. Great. I'm in. Amazing. This brings us to the second category.
In that first category, would circumcision be in that first category?
That's a good question. I don't know which category circumcision falls into. I would imagine, no, I'm actually fairly comfortable saying circumcision belongs to the second category that we're talking about now.
Okay.
Okay. The second category are the ones that are supra-rational, which means we have no idea, even after they've been told us, we have no idea what's going on. The picture here is of a red heifer, but really that's kind of a general blanket one for all purity and impurity. Women going to the mikveh, men going to the mikveh, right? Touching a dead body and then you're impure, and then sprinkle some holy water on you from a red heifer and you're pure. Some of you are probably not even familiar with all these laws because some of them don't apply today just because we don't have the red heifer. But the fact is that these mitzvot apply. And I mentioned here before that even in the morning when we wake up, we're supposed to wash our hands, right? Negelvasser al netilat yadayim. We wash 3 times in the, alternatingly, right, left, right, left, right, left. And I do that with my son, who's close to 4 years old, or 3.5 years old. And when he doesn't want to do it, I tell him, well, you have to because there's impurity on your hands. And he looks at his hands, like, where's the tumah? Where's the tumah? You can't see it. You can't even feel it. You can't even convince yourself you feel it. It's not going to happen. And there are many mitzvot that fall into this category. Alan, I would venture to say that Brit Milah falls into this category, but we could discuss that at a different time. So there are many mitzvot that fall into this category. By the way, some elements of kosher, for instance, not mixing milk and meat, fall into this category. I will be first to tell you a cheeseburger looks delicious. I see no reason why we shouldn't be having them. But for some reason, God told us. Okay, the third category is mishpatim. That's the easiest one, the easiest to understand. That is, do not murder, do not steal, right? No raping, adultery, all this kind of stuff. Makes perfect sense to us. I'm not here to challenge why it makes sense to us and whether there is a moral, an objective morality that exists or objective ethics that exist or don't exist. I'll leave that to philosophers. But for the most part, most of the world agrees that people should not be murdering each other, etc. That being said, the Torah has lots of laws in that regard, laws of torts and damages and all sorts of things like that. And those laws are called mishpatim. Okay. Any questions on this so far?
Zoshi, can you hear me?
We do.
Okay, so I just had a question about when we were talking about the kashrut law of not mixing milk and meat, and I just want to confirm, you said it wasn't practical, it wasn't rational?
I did. Whoa, big difference. I didn't say it's not practical. I said it's not rational. We don't understand why we do it, but practical, very practical.
The mother's milk. That's pretty. It explains it pretty well that you're not supposed to see the baby in its mother's milk. That's kind of milk.
That's what I said. I said, if thou shalt not bathe a kid in its mother's milk, the prohibition is that, God forbid, you should have a mommy and her child in, the same meal, essentially. Yeah. So that is a very rational, I would think.
I wasn't referring specifically to that case, and it's very, very clear from the Torah that even though that's the verse that's used, it's very, very clear that the law goes way beyond that. right? We eat burgers. Well, not we, but Americans eat burgers with cheese. I would say the chances of them having that together with their mother's milk is like very, very slim. And the Torah is not telling us only in order to avoid that. One Torah is also telling us not to do it, because when you eat milk and meat, that is a prohibition, regardless of how it's done. So I guess that's where it becomes super rational. Okay, fair enough. Maybe there's one element of it that's rational.
No, I get what you're saying, but then kosher laws get really like, why the hoof and the cud and like where does it all come from? We don't really know.
Also, for example, we can't eat shrimp. There's not really a logical reason for that.
There's not really a logical reason. Correct. The reason I said only some of the reasons of kosher is because there are certain reasons that are given, for instance, for shechita, as painless as possible, etc. So that's kind of one of them.
Do you keep muting me?
I do, because when I'm talking, from your phone.
Okay. No, but because I just had a quick. We were talking about there's no rational reason, for not eating shrimp, and of course there's the perspective that we just don't eat shrimp because God says we don't eat shrimp and all that stuff, but. Do you agree that interpretation can go far beyond intent? We know that shrimp are actually very dirty animals and they are bottom feeders, and that they literally eat feces from the bottom of the ocean. So, and that's just a truth. That's just like a scientific fact. So and I know this isn't exactly necessarily the orthodox way of looking at it, but you can sort of apply, a practical reason to something that maybe in the beginning wasn't so practical.
Very good. Very, very fair point. And actually, we are told to spend the rest of our lives trying to find meaning in mitzvot. What you mentioned about shrimp is actually a very interesting one. Somebody told me recently that it's come out that in the areas where they actually farm the shrimp, and other places where they breed the shrimp, and then they take there's issues with like the ecosystem, like it somehow affects the whole ecosystem. And I'm not here to get into all the details of all the different mitzvot, and obviously we can find rationality for certain ones, etc. But generally speaking, the way the Torah presents the mitzvah to us, 100%, and Melina, if that gives us meaning in that mitzvah, there's nothing wrong with using that. And you mentioned it's not orthodox. Correct, it's not typical, and maybe certain people spend a lot of time doing that and other people don't. But either way, the point is that the Torah didn't tell that to us, that's for sure. So there are certain mitzvot, the way they're presented to us by the Torah is, don't steal. The reason you shouldn't steal is because a society cannot exist if people are stealing from each other, right? Don't murder, things like that. Life is sacred. And then there are mitzvot that are told us Shabbat because of X, Y, Z. And then there are mitzvot that are given to us, sorry, no reason, just because I said so. That's it. And that's really the point that we're getting to here. Why are we getting to that point? Now, obviously, out of the three of them, let me go back to the previous slide. Out of the three of them, which of them is the most difficult? Arnold, can you read for us, please?
This is the statute, hukat, of the Torah, because Satan and the nations of the world taunt Israel, saying, what is this commandment, and what purpose does it have? Therefore, the Torah uses the term statute. I have decreed it. You have no right to challenge it.
Okay. And this one obviously becomes the most difficult category for us to ever keep, right? Chukim becomes the one that's the one that's challenging to us, and that's the one that we look at and we're like, what's going on over here? Like, I don't understand this one. I'm a little uncomfortable with that part of Judaism. It just makes no sense to me. Why am I doing this, etc. Right? And by the way, different mitzvot. So sometimes we have that approach even to mitzvot that we do understand, just we maybe don't have that understanding. So we take some time when we learn about the mitzvah, we appreciate the mitzvah, then we have an understanding of it, and we can move forward with it. But there are certain mitzvah that just don't have that. Since there's been a little ambiguity, the mitzvah I'm going to use as my example, we're just going to go with purity and impurity, because there's clearly no logic behind that. Purity and impurity is this spiritual thing. We have no understanding of it, and the Torah just tells us it's there. So that's obviously the hardest one to keep. Now, the Torah in this week's Parsha tells us, if you follow in my statutes. So here's the question. If we translate the word Bechukotai as talking about chukim, which is fairly straightforward, that makes sense, right? But why would Hashem tell us, do we only get reward for following chukim? We only get reward for following all the rewards that I mentioned in this week's Torah portion. We only get them for following the commandments that are rational, that are super rational to us. Why would we use, as the question here, such a narrow description to describe a broad spectrum of all Jewish observance? It could have said, Im b'mitzvotai telechu. If you will follow in my mitzvot. That would make much more sense. God will give us reward if we follow in the way of his mitzvot. Why would it use such a narrow term? Okay?
What's exactly the term?
The term is Behar-Bechukotai. It's on the screen here.
It does say the S mitzvah.
Behar-Bechukotai means what now exactly?
We're not sure, but right now it means in my statutes, in the way of my statutes.
Oh.
Yes, Kalman, you had a question?
Oh, the pasuk also says the S mitzvah tishmeru.
That's correct. So we just had the pasuk. I'm not going to go back in the slide because it'll take too long. But we just had the pasuk. The pasuk goes, Im b'chukotai telechu. If you will follow the ways of my statutes, ve'et mitzvotai tishmeru, and you will do my mitzvot. That's how the pasuk continues. The question here is, why would it not stop at that? Im b'mitzvotai tishmeru, or im b'mitzvotai telechu. If you will follow the way of my mitzvot. Why are we narrowing it down to this small category of the mitzvot? Assuming that's the translation, why would we use specifically those mitzvot as an example for it? Anybody have any ideas?
So you're asking the question. You should say, why don't we follow in the ways of the mitzvahs?
It does say the way of the mitzvot. That's the next words. The question is, why does it also choose to zone in on one specific category?
What's the one category?
Bechukotai, the category of chukim, the ones that are above our rationale.
Oh, I see. I understand the question now. Okay.
Everybody with me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So on a very simple level, there's a fairly simple answer. I mean, I could open this up for conversation. I just feel like there's a lot of us here, and we're going to get a lot of opinions. So this one I'll just present. But I think this is fairly straightforward. Most people would come to this with enough thought. Why would God narrow it down to one category? I'll tell you why. Because as we know, when is someone's love proven for someone else? Not when they're willing to do the thing. You know what I mean? Like the first dates. Your date takes you, and the two of you go out for a movie. You both love the movie, right? Not really a sign that he has any feelings for you or she has any feelings for you, whatever it is, right? But all of a sudden, one day, many days down the line, one spouse or one partner does for the other partner something that you know that he or she hates that and doesn't want to do that and doesn't understand why you even like it, right? Maybe it's let's go out for sushi. I don't get it. It's raw fish. It's not my taste. Whatever the whole thing. I do. I'm just giving an example here, right?
No, that's me. My husband loves sushi. I don't get it.
Okay, perfect. See, Ali, I knew it, and that's why I used that example. Anyways, so here's the question. The question is, not the question. Here's the point. That when that spouse takes you out for sushi, or that partner takes you out for sushi, that's when you're like, oh, you're doing it even though you don't get it. You don't know why I like it, but you know that I like it, and you're doing that for me. That's the most appreciative to me. Not that I don't appreciate when you go see a movie that we both like together. Of course I appreciate that. That's great. Let's do that all the time. But this is where it's shown. So I think that's pretty much the most straightforward answer here. And not only that, but to a certain degree, Hashem is kind of challenging us. Let's see if you can do that for every mitzvah. Let's see if even when you do take me to the movies, you can do it only because I want to and because you love me, etc. Right? So same idea. Every mitzvah should be done because Hashem wants us to do it, not because, I understand that it's not about Hashem, it's about you, right? As the Rebbe points out in text, where are we holding here? 4a. Alan, can you read for us, please?
All mitzvah, even rational ones, must be fulfilled not only because we appreciate their reasoning, but rather because they were given at Sinai with a basic sense of commitment.
Okay, so maybe Hashem is hinting to us that in addition to the particulars of this particular mitzvah, every mitzvah should be fulfilled because I said so. Given at Sinai, commitment, and that's it. What is gained by doing something just because Hashem said so? So actually, there's two things that are gained. Number one, Ron, if I can ask you to read text 4b.
First, if mitzvah of observance is predicated on a personal conviction as to their sound logic, it will ultimately lead to a situation our sages describe. Today, your Yetzer Hara tells you to do X, tomorrow Y, until you're serving idols outright. To explain, inasmuch as the Yetzer Hara is the one telling you to follow mitzvot, namely because it makes perfect sense and not simply because Hashem instructed you to do so, you are essentially unmoving yourself from Hashem. This primes you to thereafter fall even lower until the very abyss of idolatry. Second, mitzvah observance left to rationale alone is missing a critical element of religious life, Hashem. To leave Hashem out of any part of our religious commitment is senseless at best, and as such, everything we do must be undergirded by a sense of blind faith.
Okay, a lot to unpack there. Thank you, Ron. So number one is as follows. Number one, God wants us to do the mitzvahs regardless of where our intellect leads us. Okay, what does that mean? Let's talk about our Yetzer Hara for a second, right? What is our animal soul? What is our evil inclination, like the thing that inclines us to do negative things? Very, very lightly boiled down, very simply boiled down, it comes down to one thing: ego. It's all about me. It's selfish, right? There is a possibility for a Jew to be a very good Jew and doing lots of mitzvahs, but it's all driven by his selfish side, by the Yetzer Hara. What's the problem with that? No problem so long as he's doing the mitzvahs. I mean, there is. It's a separate problem, but at least the first point, there's no problem as long as he's doing the mitzvahs. Here's the problem: if it's coming from your selfishness, one day that selfishness won't work. You'll come. A situation will arise where to you it doesn't make sense, and to God it does make sense. And there, because you're missing the commitment element of the mitzvahs, it disappears. Again, if the only reason we do mitzvahs is because we understand them, even the mitzvahs that have reasons to be understood, okay? I keep Shabbos every week. I keep Shabbat. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful mitzvah. I spend time, with my family, and I zone in on what's important to me, etc. And it's a time to focus for the rest of the week, etc. All sorts of great reasons. That's fine. But if that's the only reason you're doing it, then one day it will make sense to you not to do it, and then you won't do it. So that's reason number one, okay? Reason number two is because you're divesting the mitzvah of any godliness. This is more of a spiritual reason. When you do a mitzvah, in addition to you doing some sort of meaningful act, whatever it is, you're also connecting and fusing with a very strong divine energy of God, right? If you're doing it only because you want to do it and not because God wants to do it, you've just removed the God factor. That's very, very sad. That demotes your mitzvah to just a basic act, which has maybe some meaning to it, but it's not godly per se. It's very selfish because it's all about your understanding and about what level you relate to it or you don't relate to it. And just to finish off this point, Marilyn, if I can ask you to read for us, please, text 4C, and then we'll regroup. Don't forget to unmute. Sorry, Marilyn, we still don't hear you. There you go.
Another reason why mitzvah observance must not be predicated on logic and reason alone. Even if we argue that the person will indeed fulfill the mitzvot, they will still lack a critical element, the sentiment that they are something from and connected one with God, a part of Torah.
And that is the second reason, right? So we have two reasons here that we had to our second question. We'll get back to the original question soon. But to our second question, which was, if you remember, what is so special about Behar-Bechukotai, right? What is so special about this third category of mitzvahs? Here's what it is. Number one, all of our religious commitment must be faith-based, as if everything defies reason, because number one, human reason can justify anything. So there will come a day when it won't work with our reason, and then we won't do it. And number two, when we do it, regardless of our reason, it incorporates the godly element into it. I'm not doing it because of me, I'm doing it for God, right? And again, we could tie this back to that analogy that we always use of the spouses, right? True love is when you do something for someone else, okay? Now, ideally, not only are you doing something for someone else, one thing that you do, and it's a special thing, you do it for them, and you only have it in mind, and you actually hate doing it, but you do it for them. True love is when everything that you do for them, you only do because of them, even if it's something you love doing anyways, right? So again, those two examples. You hate sushi, but you love the Avengers franchise, right? So when you do the sushi and you go out for sushi with them and you're doing it only because of them, sure, that's where the love is evident most. But when you go out for a movie and somehow it's very, very clear, it's very, very clear to the other person that even though you like doing it, you like this franchise, you like going to these movies, but you're going because they want to go and you're doing this for them, that love becomes now all-encompassing. It's a blanket. It's all over everything. Right? Everybody with me? And that's why it's so important not just to do mitzvahs because we understand them, but also to do them specifically with a God element. To reach a stage where this is I'm only doing it because God says it. That's it. It's not about my understanding here. Okay.
You know, I can think of an example.
Go ahead.
When I tell my friends, well, I do this just because it's commanded by God. I can't give you any other reason than that. My non-religious friends kind of look at me. They don't say anything, but I know that they're thinking, it's a new concept for them. They're thinking there has to be a rational reason. And if she doesn't have a rational reason, she's out there somewhere. She's not part of us.
Of that part, right?
Yeah, and you know, I feel that really strongly, you know, with people. But other times they just kind of listen, and because they have they have some respect for me,
right.
They what is the word?
Dismiss?
No, suspend. Yes, suspend their own criticism, and I feel like I've touched them a little bit. You know,
it's a little ironic. Thank you for sharing, Marilyn. It's a little ironic that in the one area of life where people like to deride other people is actually where the deepest connection with God is. In other words, there are some people that, like Marilyn said, we talked about Judaism, they're like, I can get on board with any part of Judaism I understand. The parts that I don't understand, you're an idiot for doing it. I don't know why you're doing that, right? Right? Hold on, Melina, hold on. I'm just going to mute you because we're getting a lot of feedback. When really it's the exact opposite. It's specifically there that the deepest part of Judaism lies. When we do something we don't understand, that's when we're really showing our deepest commitment to God, etc. And in fact, we look to have that kind of commitment even in the regular parts, the parts that we do understand. Yes, Melina, go ahead.
No, that reminds me of a time that I was in Jerusalem actually, and I was listening to Rabbi Akiva Tatz, who I'm sure you know very well, right?
I'm just afraid to talk. I'm just afraid to talk. I do a lot of people.
Oh, but can you hear me?
I do.
Okay. So no, I was just remembering, I had this conversation with Rabbi Akiva Tatz just about the rationality of belief in God. And I remember this was the first time I don't know, maybe I was like 18 at this point or 17. And I remember that he said something that always really struck with me. He was like, it's harder to prove there's not a God than there is to prove there is. And when you look at it from that perspective, you understand that not everything can be explained away by rationale, and I'm saying that as a very practical person, but I think he had an excellent point.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for sharing. Sorry, I'm going to mute you again like that we don't have the feedback. Thank you very much for sharing. Okay, so this could have been the end of the class, and this is a fine, beautiful class. Why does God choose specifically to focus on Behar-Bechukotai? Specifically because those mitzvot are super rational. That's where there's that A-game commitment, or that above and beyond commitment. Great. Here's the problem. The problem is text number 5. I shared with you a verse, and this is always, you should never accept something from somebody if they're not going to start right away with Rashi. So let's dive into Rashi here. Sonia, can I ask you to read for us, please? The Rashi on that first verse from this week's Parsha, which we mentioned at the beginning of the class.
If you follow my statutes, I might think that this refers to the fulfillment of mitzvot. However, when scripture says, and observe my commandments, mitzvah fulfillment is already stated. So what then is the meaning of if you follow my statutes?
Okay, thank you, Sonia. So here's the problem. Rashi analyzes the pasuk beautifully. And like Kalman mentioned at the beginning, he says, look, mitzvot are already mentioned. So this strange word, Bechukotai, you know what it's talking about? It means that you must toil in Torah study. Sorry, Sonia, I cut off the last word, so I'm just reading it. It means that you must toil in Torah study. So actually that word which till now you've been translating as meaning mitzvot and saying it's a specific category of mitzvot actually means Torah study. Okay. Now what's the problem with that? Because let's try to apply that same logic to that. If you go in the way of my Torah study, right? In other words, if you study Torah and you do so in a supra-rational way, then I will give you reward. So what's wrong with saying that? We have to study Torah in a perfectly illogical and irrational way. I'll tell you what the problem with that is very clearly. Phil, if you can read for us, please. Text 6. With regards to Torah study, we have one very clear law. Don't forget to, yeah.
When studying the oral tradition, if you do not understand what you're learning, it is not considered Torah study at all.
Okay. So when you study the written tradition, thank you, Phil. In other words, if you're studying the 5 books of Moses, just by reading the words, the very words themselves have a certain holiness, and you're actually fulfilling the mitzvah of studying Torah. However, if you're studying any other part of the Torah, which is the majority of Torah, if you don't understand what you're saying, you're actually not doing a mitzvah. You might convince yourself you are, but you're not doing a mitzvah. So here's the question. Bechukotai is once again perplexing. Considering that now Rashi just explained to us that it's not used, and of course there's 2 ways of looking at it. You can either look at it as referring to the mitzvah, but Rashi is taking the approach that it's referring to the Torah, to Torah study. So Torah study is by definition an academic pursuit. So how can you study Torah and do it in a super-rational way? Anybody? Would anybody attend this class? Here's the question. Okay, back to the original question at the beginning of class. Why are you here? Is there anybody? Raise your hand now. If you're so flat, a few people mentioned that they like me as a teacher. No problem. I'll take all the flattery. But here's the deal. Would you ever come to the class just for the flattery? In other words, you would sit in for an hour. You wouldn't understand a word of what I said. And you would just sit in for an hour just because you like the tone of my voice. I don't know. Never. The whole reason we're here is because we understand Torah, and Torah is all about understanding, right? So how can we have, and this is the real part that we're trying to get to. This is the meat of the class right here. How can we have an uber-rational approach to something which by definition seems to be an academic pursuit? And that's
how can we have an irrational approach to something that's an academic pursuit?
Exactly. In other words, something that seems by definition to be rational.
Because
how can you say
studying isn't rational all the time?
Come again?
Because what you're actually studying, the words, they're not rational all the time.
Well, then we just learned a law, a halacha, that if that's the case, then you're actually not fulfilling the mitzvah of studying Torah. You have to understand what you're saying. So if you have to understand, it's a catch-22. If you have to understand what you're studying in order to study Torah, and we have to figure out a way how you could do that uber rationally. In other words, suspend your rationale to do that. How do you study Torah in an uber rational way? Or to put it differently like this, okay? We spent a lot of time in the first half of class figuring out a way that we can have that total commitment relationship with God, right? Just like we have with our spouses, hopefully, ideally, right? Where we do things just for them, and hopefully that permeates everything that we do for them. We do it with the total commitment. I'm doing it for you, honey, not for anyone else, right? That's beautiful with regards to mitzvah. But how can we do that with regards to Torah study? How can I say it's all only about God when the whole pursuit here is to understand it?
I can maybe take a stab.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, a couple things. First of all, even when you do the irrational mitzvahs, you still got to know how to do them. The irrational mitzvahs do have certain technicalities to them, like even when you do the red heifer, there's a certain way it's got to be done. You got to kind of understand how it's done. There's things that go on in the temple that you have to understand. So even the irrational mitzvahs,
you're studying those details that make no sense to you, but you're just doing them because of God.
Yeah, but you still have to understand the details,
right?
And who does the details and the exception of the details and when the details are done. I mean, there's a lot that goes on there. So in that sense, there is an understanding, at least on the superficial level, the understanding how to do them. Like even the red heifer, for example, there's a whole set of laws on
100%
on how to do that.
I'm with you on that. Here's my problem.
Okay,
that's not really. Ali just used the word remember. She said one of the things is really just remembering. Otherwise, it's just a list of rules and laws.
You have to remember all the things to how to.
And I get it. We definitely use our brain when it comes to memory and when it comes to understanding just instructions and rules. We definitely use our brains there. But I don't know that that's the deep connection with God that we have when we study Torah. If you look through, what it means to properly study Torah, what it means to properly appreciate this exercise we do when we study Torah, it's all about the oneness that we have with God. To use the relationship analogy again, it's when your spouse gets you, right? That moment when maybe there's a breakdown of communication, or it's just very hard to communicate and nobody else understands you and your spouse understands you. Whether that's an emotion or whether that's intellectually, and your spouse understands you. That's a very deep connection formed right there. And the purpose of studying Torah is in order to understand God, even though obviously we never fully understand him, just like we never fully understand our spouses. At least I'll talk for the men here. But just as, right, so when it comes to God, we'll never fully understand him, but the objective of understanding God is much deeper than just knowing how to do a mitzvah. So Alan, your answer is definitely valid. I would say it's insufficient, because when it comes to the deepest part of understanding Torah, which is when we get God, when we really dig deep down into it and we understand a godly concept that is explained in the Torah, our intellect is definitely necessary. Our rational.
I have one last response.
Okay, go ahead.
This is probably not what you're looking for, but I'm just going to
I'm
put
happy
it
to
in there.
give all the blame for going overtime to you.
Okay.
Because I take the blame every week. This week it's Alan's fault. Go ahead. No, I'm only kidding.
Part of the way God designed the world is that in order to move forward, sometimes it requires a rationality. I'll give you an example. When the Jews left Egypt, they had to march right through the sea. I mean, they were literally marching into a sea. And they freaked out, they yelled, and they didn't want to go. And God said, keep on moving. So that whole scenario there was simply irrational. He took us out in an irrational way.
Right.
That's the bottom line. I mean, they were literally going right into the sea. That's where they were going. Now, they didn't know what was going to happen.
Got it.
So, when you're in their position, that was irrational. I mean, we know the story. We know eventually Nachshon's going to jump in. The water goes up.
How does this relate to the studying Torah, which is a rational, blind faith? But I guess here's the question. How does this relate to when we study Torah? How can studying Torah be irrational?
Well, the point is with the Red Sea was irrational too, but that was the way out.
So when we study the section of the Torah in which the Red Sea is related, the study of the sea is related?
I guess I'm having trouble connecting all those dots. So I'll just put it in there. Let's leave it.
So we're comfortable though, right? Everybody understands how you can do a mitzvah and do it superseding your intellect. Everybody gets that, right? The total commitment level of doing a mitzvah. Right. What we're looking for now is how can we get that same identical total commitment level when it comes to studying Torah. So in order to understand that, we really need to understand this word, Behar-Bechukotai, okay? Or the word chukah, which means to engrave, okay? Like another explanation for the word is chukah is lachkok, to engrave something. And let's read from the Alter Rebbe here. Where are we holding here with the reading? Let's see, somebody's going to read it. Jeff, can you read for us, please? Text 7.
The words, if you follow my statutes, can be interpreted by means of a metaphor from a vessel that needs to be carved out from the inside. So too, we must carve out a space in the animal soul so it can thereafter, quote, follow, end quote, namely to mature to a state of love to be included in the oneness of God. Carving out the inside is accomplished through practical mitzvot of the chukim category, such as Torah, Aduma, Tzitzit, and Tefillin, 8, which have no logical reason whatsoever. This is because these mitzvot, in fact, stem from a lofty place that is beyond reason. They are the raw will of God himself, and it is through these mitzvot that flow from such a lofty space that a space is carved out inside the animal soul. The soul is engraved with a love for God, for his or her very soul to be included in the oneness of God through these mitzvot.
Thank you, Jeff. Okay. So the Alter Rebbe is making a point that just as you have a vessel, and maybe you have a block of stone, you're trying to create a vessel out of it, right? So you've got to carve out the inside of the stone, the inside of the block, in order to create a hollow space where you're going to keep whatever it is, right? Just like that, our animal souls are actually like that. There's a certain space here that needs to be carved out. What needs to be carved out there is the commitment. Okay? So what we're trying to do is to take out the part of the animal soul which says the only reason that I serve God is because I understand him, and to instead take that element away, carve that element out, and to engrave within ourselves commitment to God that supersedes our understanding. So, of course, studying Torah has to be understood. There's no question about it. We even mentioned that if you don't understand Torah, you're actually not studying Torah. You're just saying words, right? Except for the words of the 5 books of Moses. Any part of Torah, if you're just saying words, you're not really actually understanding what you're saying. So how do we accomplish that? Just as we did with a mitzvah, how do we accomplish that with Torah? There is an approach to Torah that you can take, which is uber rational, while at the same time being an academic approach, being something rational that we do. So the study of Torah is going to remain a rational approach, you have to use your intellect until you understand that you're actually not studying. And if you don't understand it, you'll work harder at understanding it. But the approach, the attitude will still be uber rational. What do I mean about that? Let's analyze what would happen if you only come from a selfish and rational approach to studying Torah. What happens? You start to study a beautiful piece of Tanya. Great, this is talking to me. I love it. You open up a Gemara, difficult piece. You're like, the heck with this, right? Part of the expression. I'm not interested in this. It's taking too much work, right? And that might be each person at their level. Certain people are intellectually at a higher capability or a lower capability. But when you come with a rational and selfish approach to studying Torah, it's all about what am I gaining out of this? Not, oh, this is God's wisdom, right? Therefore, I should attempt to understand it. And even if it's hard for me, I'm going to keep pushing at it with the devotion and the commitment of, even though it's above my understanding, I will push and try to understand it as hard as I can. Or you just give up because this doesn't really mean that much to me. It's obviously not for me. It's not talking to me. I move on to a different part of the Torah, right? Which is not perfectly exactly. So it's the attitude that needs to be irrational. Very good, Ali. What do I mean by that? Okay, let's use the same analogy, which seems to be working, that we've been using throughout the class. 2 spouses, right? So in an unhealthy relationship, one spouse, all he wants in the other spouse is whatever he's getting out of the relationship. Very selfish. This spouse is good looking, cooks well, all the things, is giving me so much this relationship. So I'm willing to give a little bit back in order to make it work, right? In such a relationship, which obviously is extremely unhealthy, the person is coming in as a narcissist and as a selfish person, which obviously is all the things that are unhealthy and wrong with the relationship. In such a relationship, here's what's going to happen. Comes day number 1, and the spouse, pardon you my using this particular gender setup, it's just because I'm a man. So his wife says to him, honey, this is bothering me. He's like, all right, look, I want all the things that she brings to the table of the relationship, so I'm going to attempt to understand her. He spends a couple minutes. Let's say it's a difficult one, we all know that that's how relationships are. And it's difficult to understand her, and to eventually it stops being worth it. It's not worth it anymore. You're so not understandable that you don't make sense to me, my spouse, that therefore I'm out. This relationship is over, or I'm not going to attempt to understand you, which is even more unhealthy, or we get divorced, or whatever it is. Why? Because the amount of effort that I'm investing in trying to understand you doesn't weigh out equally with the selfish things that I'm trying to get out of the relationship. Okay? Very unhealthy relationship, what I just described. Very transactional. But in a true, proper, and healthy relationship, which I understand that none of us are in this type of relationship all the time, but ideally this should be our goal. What happens? Yes, Melina, divorce is a mitzvah, but that was totally off topic. Okay, but in a proper and healthy relationship, what happens? In a proper and healthy relationship, what happens? I'm sorry, Melina, you threw me totally off the chain. Anyways, in a proper and healthy relationship, what happens? The person is not there just for what they're getting out of the relationship, and then she bounces. She goes out on a high, Melina. Okay. The person doesn't just say, I'm here for everything that I want to get out of this relationship. No. They're there because they love the other person, because they want the relationship with the other person. So now I could be getting nothing out of this relationship, but if I'm having a hard time understanding that other person, I work at it with the commitment of true love, with the commitment of, I want to understand you, right? Because if I can understand that person, then I will reach that connection. So when the going gets tough, They buckle down and they say, I'm gonna work at it, and I'm gonna understand you, and I'm gonna get to this stage of I connect with you even on that level. Okay? So when it comes down to learning Torah, it's the same thing. Of course, learning Torah is a rational pursuit. It's an academic pursuit. We're trying to understand something, right? In this case, we're trying to understand the Parsha. But here's what happens. Sometimes we come to a class, halfway through, it's like, I don't know, this one's not talking to me. I'm not talking about when we're not focused, whatever. There's other things for that, right? I'm talking about when we're focused and we could, right? But this one's not talking to me. It's not for me because it's not doing anything for me. We as Jews don't come to Torah because it's doing something for us. We come to Torah because this is commitment to God. This is understanding God. So even if I'm not understanding what's so amazing about this, I keep hacking at it. Let's read this. I kind of gave you guys the whole idea, but let's read this a little bit in the text. Baron, can I ask you to read for us text 8?
When a person studies Torah with true toil, the type of hard work associated with engraving, as opposed to simply writing, it affects a sense of engraving in the heart of the person who studies it. If he or she suffers from a heart of stone, should they truly toil in Torah? Their stony heart will be penetrated by the rigor of Torah, as the verse states, stones that the water erodes.
And of course, we cannot even mention that analogy, thank you, Baron, without mentioning the story of Rabbi Akiva. Yosef Ilan. Arnold? We lost the unit. Okay, Ron, if you can read for us, please, text 9, which is from the Medrash, this story with Rabbi Akiva and how he started.
How did Rabbi Akiva start off? They say after 40 years old, he had still not learned anything. Once he encountered a hole in a rock. Who bore this hole? He asked. It is the water that constantly falls on it every day. They told him. Akiva, are you not aware of the verse stones that the water eroded? Rabbi Akiva immediately made the following calculation. If soft water can eventually penetrate a hard stone, surely Torah, which is strong like iron, can certainly penetrate my heart of flesh and blood. So he immediately set out to learn Torah.
This is the famous story of Rabbi Akiva. And where does he get the inspiration? When he sees how water can erode a rock. Why? Because the Torah is compared to water. In what way? That just as water erodes a rock, just as water engraves a rock, so too when we study Torah, it carves out a space in our hearts and minds, which directly connects to that commitment level, to that level of commitment, to that level of I do it because it's all about God and not about me, where there's no selfishness involved. Okay. And this brings us, as always, every class has a final question, which is, what is the lesson for me? Right? So why specifically this term? What is the Torah trying to teach us? I get it. The Torah is trying to tell us about the two ways, when it comes to Bechukotai, there's two ways to develop a relationship with God. That is either just from a selfish perspective, or when we suspend our selfishness, we suspend our understanding, and we go above that commitment level, that total commitment level, and that can be done for Torah, and that can be done for mitzvah, right? The study of Torah or the doing of mitzvah. But still, what is the lesson for me? Okay, how do we go about this when we study Torah? So text 10, the Rebbe begins to lay it out. Kalman, can you read for us, please?
Bechukotai are the mitzvahs called chukim. In the context of Torah study, this means that our Torah study must be in chukah-like fashion, namely with raw commitment. While it's true that we must understand Torah with our human intellect, that alone is built on a foundation of faith, namely the drive to understand. It doesn't flow from personal enjoyment, rather simply because God instructed that we must study with our own intellect. Such an attitude leads one to toil in Torah, namely, they learn beyond their natural tendency. Motivated purely by personal enjoyment, Torah study would be limited to the contours of what the person enjoys and would never lead to true toil.
Everything that we do in life, thank you, Kalman, everything that we do in life, everything that we enjoy doing in life, the enjoyment ebbs and flows, right? There are times when we're super excited about it, and there are times when we're not. And that could be even something that is like our main thing in life. You know, you can be a mathematician at the biggest university, and that's your whole life. You love math. But every once in a while, there's going to be a moment when you're not in the mood of math. And then you have to have something which is going to push you through, even during that moment when you don't enjoy it. For many of us, that could sometimes be a career, right? But that, I'm doing it even though right now I'm not in the mood of it. When we do that for God, when we do that with our Torah study, with our mitzvot, we say, I'm not satisfied with the level. Right now, let's talk specifically about Torah study. I'm not satisfied with yeah, the Torah is having a profound impact on my life. It's got amazing lessons, and it's always making me a better person, etc. Because that's good, only up until a certain point. Remember at the beginning of the class when I promised you we would elevate your Torah game, why you study Torah? Here's reason number one. Many of you gave different variants of an answer of, I enjoy the Torah study. I enjoy the class, and I get things out of it, and it's making me a better person. All great answers. I'm not saying we should let go of that. That's a great way to approach Torah study. But in addition to that, we also should have the raw commitment. Why? Because let me ask you a question. Pardon the guilt. Not every one of you is here every single week. Every once in a while, what happens? Yeah, I enjoy Zushi's Torah class, but there's a really good Broadway show on tonight. Yes, I enjoy studying Torah, but I don't know, whatever, right? Because that's the way it works. There's this up and down. And I posit to you, with all the guilt loaded on, are you ready? That in those moments, that's when you have the deepest connection to God. It's specifically that week. And I don't mean this class, any other class. It's specifically that time when there's something more enjoyable to do. Melina, that's not always life. Sometimes it's the State of the Union, and sometimes it's the Oscars. Listen, I said a little l'chaim. I could do that, right? It's specifically those.
Someone's gonna make a living, dude. Okay.
Someone has to make dinner, and someone has to.
Ali, I didn't attack you making dinner, and Melina's always going to pull her entertainment journalism card. She's going to say, "I don't watch the Oscars because I enjoy watching the Oscars. I actually hate them. I just need to because this is my living."
Yeah, I don't enjoy doing that.
Okay, fair enough.
But I could not care any less. I assure
Melina,
you.
l'chaim. What is the point we're making? And l'chaim is that Isaac in the background?
He just brought me food because I've been drinking on an empty
stomach.
stomach.
L'chaim to him. L'chaim Isaac. Where are we getting here? What's the point here? That when that battle comes, it's not just, oh, of course we should try to win it and study Torah. No. It's specifically when we study Torah that time, that's the time that we show God, I'm showing up for you. I'm not showing up because I like Rabbi Zushi's class, because if it was just I like Rabbi Zushi's class, I actually happen to like this other thing that's going on now better. I'm not showing up because I get good messages out of the Torah, because right now I have something that's weighing better on the other side. This week it's for you, or this moment it's for you. And that could be with a mitzvah, and that could be with Torah study. So that is game elevation number 1. Game elevation number 2 is text 11. Melina, if I can ask you to read for us, please. Text 11, hold on, there you go. Sorry, go ahead. We can't hear you. Melina?
Oh, I know, I'm here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Not even angels are able to perceive the secret of God's words etched into their very being. Certainly then, we simple humans cannot dare to perceive or comprehend your greatness. If an angel, which has no evil temptations, cannot perceive you. Certainly, we who possess evil urges and at times defy our own creator, we dare not assume that we understand God. How can our understanding, which can be swatted away like a mosquito, find grace in your eyes to gain any understanding of you?
Hold on, I don't think that's the full text. This is the most important part. Go ahead.
Efa.
The bottom, I just added it. The sum total.
Oh, the sum total of what we know is that we don't know you at all. From everything we work so hard to understand, we know only that you exist.
Okay, thank you, Melina. That last line is the only reason this text is being quoted, okay? If you weren't listening to the whole class, this is the moment to listen, okay? I meant to set this text up a little better and to just introduce you who wrote this text, okay? I'll bring it back up in a minute. I'm gonna read to you now from the side. For those of you that have the textbook, you have the biography of this author. This is, okay, just to put things in perspective, this is the only quote that I know from this author, okay? So much so that when I saw his name, I was like, who is that? Why are they quoting this obscure, did you say the same thing, Kalman?
Yeah, who is
Okay,
it?
so Rabbi Yedaya ben Avram HaPanini lived from 1270 to 1340. He was a poet, a physician, a philosopher. Rabbi Yedaya ben Avraham Panini was born in Bezier, I don't know exactly. Among his numerous writings is an ethical work, Bechinat Olam, and a philosophical commentary on various medrashim. During a time of controversy surrounding the study of philosophy, he wrote an apologetic letter addressed to Rabbi Shlomo ben Aderet, that's the Rashba, in defense of philosophical study, entreating him to withdraw his ban against such study. Okay, so he dabbled a lot in philosophy. But it's that last line particularly that makes him famous, okay? And I'm going to show you where he's quoted in just a moment by other commentary, later on, much more famous commentary, but he needs to be credited with this line, okay? And this is game elevation number 2. When we study Torah, here's the highest level we can reach. V'tachlit mashenoda shelo neda'acha. The sum total of what we know is that we don't know you at all. Starting to sound familiar? And the more we study about you, the less we know. And that, my friends, is Torah at its core, okay? Let's see him quoted. So text 12 is Rabbi Yosef Elbo, the Sefer Ikrim, a very famous book that goes through different, many of you are familiar with the 13 Principles of Faith by Maimonides. So there's actually different commentary that have different amounts of principles. And the Sefer Ikrim goes through a number of them. And here he is in text 12. Ali, can I ask you to read? Sorry, you were just going to take a drink. I'm sorry.
Oh, you keep muting me, so I have to unmute.
Go ahead. Text 12.
From this, we may get an idea of the great joy and delight that God has in the apprehension of his own essence. For he has an infinite number of perfections, and each one is infinite in worth. Therefore, no other being can apprehend his essence. As the wise man said when they asked him if he knew the true essence of God, if I knew him, I would be him. In other words, there's no one who comprehends his essence except Hashem, though his existence is evident most plainly to all from his acts. Praise be to him who surpasses us with his perfection, who is hidden from us despite his intense visibility, as the light of the sun and its agreeableness are hidden from those of weak sight. Their defective understanding does not prove his non-existence. The most that we can understand about God is that we cannot understand him. As the wise man said, the sum total of what we know of you is that we do not know you.
Tachlit masheneda bacha shelo neda'acha. The highest level of understanding that we can reach of God is that we will never know who he is. We will never appreciate him. Okay, and as the wise man said, what was the earlier wise man that Rabbi Yosef Elbo quoted? He said, Ilu yedaitiv hayisiv. If I would know who God is, I would be God. So the smarter you are, the more you recognize that you don't understand God. Okay, and the more you learn about God, ironically, the less you realize you know. And it can almost be stated that the ultimate goal is to realize that you know absolutely nothing about God. Does that make sense? It's like we reverse the whole thing. It's like a total palindrome, like we reverse the whole thing on its head.
So I have just a quick practical question.
Go ahead.
So we know that the word God in English comes from the Old English, which comes from the Old High German, which means good. Why do we still hyphenate it when it's not the word for God?
Actually, if you look around long enough, you'll see people that even hyphenate the word Lord. Which,
I know, but it drives me nuts because it's not the word.
Hold on. The word Lord actually can just refer to somebody that owns a tiny piece of property in Scotland, as Gary Bowden enlightened me, that his son bought him a gift. He spent $50 on a foot by a foot of a piece of property in Scotland, and now he owns the title Lord, and he has like a card to prove it. So why do we hyphenate that? Actually, this ties back to another literary technique, and I apologize to those of you that are not interested in grammar or literary techniques. I happen to enjoy these kind of things. But very often you'll see people capitalize the word he, or the word himself, or the word, different words that when they are used to refer to God, they capitalize it. Have you seen this practice before?
Yeah, those are proper nouns. We even do that in AP style, even in secular newspapers. But
hold on. So just like we do that about the word he, even though there's no holiness to the word he, but it's referring to a being that we believe is very special. So in that way, the word God or the word Lord, because they're being used to refer to God, and so there's a certain kind of holiness that's ascribed to it just by the very fact that it's being used to describe God, right? That it's not the word Adonai, it's not God's actual name.
Okay.
But therefore, we hyphenate in order that the actual word shouldn't be there. Does that make sense?
Yes, that does.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing that up. That was very off topic, but enjoyable nonetheless. Okay. So just as this applies to God, that the more we know about God, the less we realize that we understand him. The same thing applies to God's wisdom, the Torah. I'm losing track of who read and who didn't read. Jeff, if you can read for us, please. Text 13, please.
His essence and being and knowledge are absolutely one without any composition. Therefore, just as it is impossible for any creature in the world to comprehend the essence of the Creator and his being, so it is impossible to comprehend the essence of his knowledge, which is one with God himself. It is possible only to believe with a faith that transcends intellect and comprehension.
Thank you. So we will come to class after class after class, and we will learn and learn and learn about God. And certainly we will enjoy many of the classes, and that's not a bad thing. Okay, let me just make sure we're not beating up on all the enjoyment of class. But here's the problem, of all the enjoyment of Torah. But here's the problem. Torah has two elements. Number one is the learning and understanding and appreciation that we have, that we come with our own rationality, and it infuses our being with all this, all the beauty that Torah does. And number two is the total commitment, the oneness which we have when we connect with God on a level that's way above our understanding, way above our intellect, and we just connect with God. And if we choose not to do that, then we have lost a huge element of the Torah. If we choose to appreciate the Torah and appreciate the Torah, we get it, and it's such a big deal, and it's such a good influence in my life, and it's so enjoyable, and that's why I do it, then we're quashing, in other words, Torah is God's wisdom. If we quash it down to our own level, it's all about what I get from it, we are effectively wasting it. We are gifted with the chance to understand and connect with God, God's wisdom, and just to connect with him on his level. And you're going to dumb it down to your level? So that is game elevation number two. Number one is that total commitment level, right? Like we said, that you come to the class, even though there's something better, maybe something that seems more enjoyable, you say to God, no, it's all about you. I'm coming because I'm gonna study Torah, and it's all gonna be about you, not about me. And number two is that then we get a chance to connect to God on a godly level, not on our level, on God's terms, not on our terms. And this brings us to the last text, text 15. Marilyn, if I can ask you, please, to bring it home for us.
If a person assumes that they achieve complete mastery in Torah study, it only demonstrates that they aren't working hard enough. As the previous Rebbe said, even logical parts of Torah must be followed like chukim. Accordingly, it makes perfect sense that the Torah uses the term Behar-Bechukotai when talking about Torah study, even though the subject matter is all of Torah, not just chukim, but also the idot and mishpatim. When a person toils in Torah study, they come to the realization that even mishpatim are really chukim.
So even the ones we understand, we should do them as if we don't understand them. In other words, my friends, in the titular word of this week's parsha, the word Bechukotai, right, or the second parsha of this week's two parshas, we got some very deep insight both into our connection with God on a mitzvah level and on a Torah level. The Torah on the outside has this interesting veneer, right? We look all academic. Look at us sitting here, glasses of wine, sipping wine, and feeling all sophisticated because we're studying Torah, we're understanding it. And if we stop at that veneer, we have no one to blame but ourselves, because the real magic lies much deeper underneath. Where the academia stops, where the understanding stops, and we say, I keep going anyways because this is about God. So l'chaim, l'chaim. Not saying that any of you should stop coming to class if you're not enjoying if you're enjoying it too much, but we should continue to study Torah always. And we should appreciate the lessons the Torah gives us in our lives. We should appreciate all the things we understand about the Torah. But we should not stop there. We should up our game. We should appreciate that this is a connection with God. And this is about total commitment to God, something that we never can do if it's all on my terms and it's all about what I'm getting out of it. But rather it has to be about what am I experiencing and what am I appreciating about God. L'chaim, l'chaim.
So would you be happy if